Yo, okay, here we are. We're streaming live now.
Great.
Welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Busy as always. I have
hmm
two kids, a fast-growing company. So,
hmm
yeah, I think busy would be an understatement, but doing well. Doing well.
Right now, if I recall, last time we caught up was it's probably been over a year. So I think you were moving from very far Western Europe to Northern Europe. Is that?
I was moving from Portugal to the Netherlands, and it is still
Yep,
in progress. I'm moving
still in
in.
progress.
Yeah, because we bought a house in the Netherlands and
hmm
we like renovated the house, and the plan
Yep.
was to move, I don't know, November or something last year. We're
hmm
moving in 4 weeks from now, and
Oh
we bought the flights and
wow.
all. But yeah,
Okay.
COVID really delayed it. So yeah,
Right.
but
So
I'm really
COVID kind
looking.
of slowed down your move, but probably sped up your business.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yes, probably. Yeah, we don't really have it clear before and after because we always really started doing business during COVID, but probably
Mm.
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Right, right. And so you've been I think just sort of to rewind for people who are new to meeting you for the first time. You've been involved in kind of the distributed work, remote work phenomenon for what, most of the decade or so, right?
Yeah,
Starting with GitLab, was it?
yeah. I joined GitLab in early 2014 when the company was just getting founded, and we never had an office. It didn't work out because Dimitri was in Ukraine, we had Marin in Serbia, and me and Sid were
hmm
in the Netherlands with Jacob. So yeah, and ever since it was funny because I met Sid at a company where I had to travel an hour and a half by train to get to the office and an hour and a half back each day.
Right.
And ever since, doing nothing else. And then 2.5 years ago, I founded Remote.
Right. And when it sounds like did you know Sid before you guys worked together on GitLab? You guys had
Yeah,
worked at a previous company?
yeah. We worked together at a different company. I think he was like a consultant or so there, but we were both just programmers there, right from the
Right.
OS.
And in 2014 was, relatively early compared to sort of how the world has moved now. So I wonder, like, can you share a little bit about what you learned at that time? What was it at that time that was kind of in the in the water, in a sense? The thing. What is it that made it clear to you that that was the way that things should be structured, or that that's how you wanted to organize, the company?
Yeah. So when we started GitLab, we did it remote because that was the only practical thing to do. But the one thing we knew was that open source communities and open source projects, which GitLab was, they've always been working fully distributed. They were always completely remote. So we knew that worked. And like if we would just continue with that, no, that would be a natural way of being. The question was, do we ever need to get an office to be together? And we would spend time together, but and already at the time it was very. I always wondered, like, if I do all my work on the computer, it's all on the internet, and in
Right.
GitLab, then why would I go to the
hmm
office? Beyond just the
Right.
meetings. And we quickly learned that there's not really any downsides. Like I think that's the thing. Like it was so established with everybody that, well, if you have a company, you need to have an office, but we didn't, and we never had a downside. I think the only things that really changed over the last decades is that video conferencing tools became really good, and truth be told, in 2014 they were good enough.
Mm.
We had Google Hangouts back then, which I think we used for almost all our calls initially at GitLab. I think later we switched to Blue Jeans and eventually to Zoom, but that was about it. And
hmm
really didn't feel like there was anything else that was particularly strange about the way we're doing it and not working. And we were the weird guys for sure. Like that was very obvious to everybody we spoke to, including VCs that said, "Well,
Right.
if we're going to invest in you, you're going to have to open a large office in San Francisco."
Right.
It just never felt necessary to do so, and I think it's not like we were super determined early on, like we're never going to open an office. It was more like,
hmm
well, if we find that we will need one, or like it would benefit us, we will probably do it. We want the company to succeed.
Yeah.
It was just never necessary. So I think
Right.
that led us to just building the company as such. And then, if you don't have an office, then you might as well hire from everywhere. That
Right.
works out really, really well because, talented people are everywhere. So
Yeah.
yeah, it just came together really well in a way that was kind of natural to the company.
Right, right. Yeah, it's nice when things kind of organically just emerge and then you can kind of harness them and try to help make them useful to serve for kind of what you guys are trying to do. So that's a nice story of that. I think one of the things that people, often have concerns around, I think you mentioned like, oh, you should have a big office in San Francisco. Or people are like, aren't you going to miss, how do you whiteboard with your teammates? It seems like whiteboard and brainstorming is hard. Execution is maybe easy remote, but whiteboarding, whiteboarding and brainstorming is hard. How do you have you ever felt any of the kind of the headwinds that I think people propose might be problems?
No, I think, if you don't have the option to go to an office, you have to find another way to make things work for you. It's as simple as that. And so if you're going to look for how can I do activity X, then probably it's going to be different or worse. But if you just think about, well, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Let's find a way to do that. You find that there's plenty of tools and other ways to go about doing those things. So, if it's about being creative or brainstorming, there's millions of tools to be able to do that. And I think early on at GitLab, I always been someone that is good at writing and like just writing stuff down. Like I'm not the person to need to sketch out drawings.
Right.
And I led product early on at GitLab, so the product people didn't need it. And I think, and even then, if you really want to whiteboard, there's great tools online for it.
Right.
you can just do it on a paper and hold it up to the screen if you're really desperate. But like, there's also great tools for that. But all the other bits, you can get around it with tools. Again, you don't have to replicate the exact thing. And now and then, when you really want to do it, we would get together. Especially early on, I think we got together quite frequently. But even later on, we would get together with a bunch of colleagues. I never really felt like we had to spend much time in large groups of people together to be able to be creative or to come up with new things. And in fact, that was one of our tricks early on, is that we were wildly creative and wildly efficient at releasing new things at GitLab. And the trick was just, well, we just write things down. We just would spend time on them, and that was it. And then if it's about being collaborative, I think if you work on a problem, it's not necessarily true that being together in the same time in the same space is like the most effective way to come up with like novel ideas and to be critical of ideas. It actually leans very much the other direction. You lean into groupthink much more. So I think also just not doing that activity helped a lot, which is like you write down an idea, you give other people time to comment on it and to work with that rather than doing it all in the same moment. So we never felt that. We just never felt that. And then there's other things where people say, well, what about those spontaneous moments of being together and coming up with an idea? And I think those come from the little in-between times that you have in the office, the times where you're not actively in the context of work. And I think that is something you have to address when you have a remote organization, where you explicitly create times together with colleagues outside of the context of work. So you and I spending time together just to have a coffee together, something like that. And I think, and again, at GitLab, we worked very actively at different scales of the organization to create those moments. Early on, we had a 1-2 hour call every day with the whole company, but the company was 7 people, so that was fine. It was not a problem. And as we scaled up, we thought of different ways to do that. And I think then you're going to end up in a similar situation where you will still have those moments if they occur, even though I would argue that they're very rare amongst all the hundreds of interactions that you have.
Meaning rare moments when you have to collaborate synchronously, or?
No, like I think the moments where everything comes together, you're not in the context of work, yet you're talking about something work related. And that is like the magical moment people talk about when together in the office. I think those moments are very rare relative to, or like maybe the better way to phrase this, like they're infrequent relative to the amount of interactions that you would have with people. So,
do you ever create contexts? Like I've heard of some, a lot of times an in-office company will have like, video games or, a pool table or ping pong or something. Do you ever create explicit context like that as a kind of a gathering point online? Like, do you play Fortnite together or Among Us or, something like that?
Yeah, at Remote we do this a lot. We play a lot of games together. Actually, we have a Minecraft server. We have every Thursday people play games together, like Among Us. And the one weird thing we do is everybody gets a VR headset. So, which I think is one of the best ways to do this. Just like a really intensive game like Fortnite, because one, you're completely disconnected from work, and two, you have actually an actual environment to interact in, but you still see your colleagues. And so that might be in Beat Saber, that might be in something like Rec Room, for example, which is really, really good place to hang out. So yeah, we do that a lot. And I think we purposely think of it like that, like to create a space for you to bond with your colleagues, but also out of the context of actual work.
Mm-hmm. And we touched before, briefly, I mentioned kind of the synchronous moment, but do you guys think about synchronous versus asynchronous as like an explicit, like is it in job recs that you expect it to be asynchronous, or you expect it to be some overlap time for certain hours per day? Or how do you sort of think about like timeframes when you have kind of worldwide teams you're working with?
Yeah, I think, and I'm talking more about like how we do things at Remote, right? Which is, I think, the latest version of my thinking. I think we try to be very pragmatic about it, which is that I think that certain jobs lend themselves much better to be done asynchronously. And for example, in sales team, you actually want to be conscious of where people are in the world, because they have a lot of synchronous work they have to do. They have to have meetings, right? Like, it's a weird way to say meetings, but they have to have a lot of meetings. But that said, like internally, and even in the way we build teams, we don't spend too much time thinking about it, and I don't think of it like in job specification at all, beyond things like customer service and sales that need to be awake at certain times. Other than that, across the organization, we don't have like a mandate to be online between certain times. It's not like we're unaware of it. For example, we have a director of product in Australia, and so we try to not build a team in which he is required to work with both Europe and the US at the same time. They can never meet.
Frustrates everybody,
yeah. But beyond that, not really. I think most of the work we do lends itself to do asynchronously quite well. And whenever necessary, it is always reasonably easy to set up like a meeting between almost anyone in the organization. I think there's very rare exceptions to that. And so that's basically how we do it. I think the one thing you have to get comfortable with is one, just doing things asynchronously and just reading an agenda, or like watching a Loom video, for example, of someone that shared an update with you. And the other one is being very pragmatic about, well, if we need a meeting, we need a meeting, right? Like sometimes it is easier to do a meeting, and then you have to just make it work between two or more people. Meetings with many people tend to be very ineffective because a lot of the people in the meeting will not be contributing to it.
Right.
They also happen to be the hardest to schedule, so we just don't do those, or at least we try to avoid them as much as possible.
Right. Are there any tools in particular that have been useful for kind of being replacement for the meeting? Like, does a lot of it happen on Slack or Notion or?
Yeah, we use Loom very extensively, especially for updates, and then Notion as well to like post updates and agendas and such. And that's about it. We Slack, okay, it's not a good way to work asynchronously. Slack, I think we use Slack extensively, right? And but we don't use it. It's not a great tool to work asynchronously because there's implied urgency to everything you do on Slack. And then for project management, we use our engineering team and product team uses GitLab, but the rest of the organization uses Asana. And we find that some teams, our international expansion team, operates essentially completely within Asana. Like it's like they don't use Slack. Like we have like a single incoming board across the organization for any kind of request to another department. That's like a formal request that needs a timeline, etc. And like everything goes through there, and that works surprisingly well. Like everybody has access to it. Everybody knows how to manage it. Everybody has like their own clear inbox there. That works really well. It's really actually kind of a nice tool to work asynchronously.
Yeah, nice. And so let's take it a little bit back from the transition from, so at GitLab, you learned everything about kind of how that organization kind of evolved. And then my understanding is a lot of that knowledge and thinking is what informed the creation of remote.com. So Can you tell us a little bit about sort of that transition, at least to frame up now kind of what you're working on day to day with remote.com?
Yeah. So, at GitLab, our policy for hiring people was we hire the best person we find for any given job, right? The best fit for our organization. And that would mean we would hire people all over the world in 67 different countries or so. And when you do that, and especially as an organization starts to get bigger, you have to be aware that how can you actually hire someone? And what many startups do today is they hire everybody as a contractor. But the reality is that that's not legal. If you hire someone with the intent, like they're full-time part of this company, they're like an employee, you have to meet local labor requirements, local labor law requirements. You have to run local payroll, give them a local employment agreement. That's a lot. That's very difficult, and we never found like a great solution for that at GitLab, other than setting up the entity, doing all the work ourselves. And so, not ever having found a great solution, and seeing that in all other ways, having like a remote organization works so incredibly well, it seemed like a very obvious thing to solve for. So after 5 years at GitLab, I decided I was going to solve that problem. And that's exactly how remote came to be. And so remote started specifically to solve that problem with the intent of, one, creating more opportunities for people around the world and allowing them to eventually build more wealth, right? If you have access to more opportunities, you can make...
Oops, are you still there, Yo?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
I think Ayush is back, but I think he might be fiddling with things, and hopefully we don't screw things up. You were saying more access to opportunities?
Yeah, so if we create more access to opportunities for individuals on one end, and on the other end, make it possible for organizations to hire anybody from anywhere, they can scale up easier, and you solve this problem. And like what I think is like the largest threshold for companies to start working remotely, other from the cultural aspect of like, I don't have an office anymore. Yeah, I think that is exactly what we wanted to achieve with remote and how we got started. And so that led us to doing what we do today, which is solve all of that.
Right. And your focus, if I understand correctly, on kind of the infrastructure for operating as opposed to kind of like discovering the talent points. It's more like who your team is, but now you actually need to do the executional piece of operating, getting payroll set up, or I assume you're employer of record in all of these locations, right?
Yeah. So the way it works is, if you find someone great, we take care of all the rest, right? So you just come to us, you tell us, I want to hire Jane. She lives in this country that I barely know where it is on the planet. Mm-hmm. And then what we do is we actually take care. We run payroll, we provide benefits, we make sure everybody's compliant, like Jane, the employer, and us. And we are always the employer of record ourselves. So remote actually has over 50 entities around the world, and I think it will be over 80 by the end of the year, where we are established. We have a local bank account, we have local payroll, we have local attorneys. It's massive. It's incredibly complex to manage, and the only thing that keeps us going is constantly thinking, well, this is our job. We are the ones doing this, so that nobody else has to do it. But it's incredible pain to maintain, to build and manage and maintain all of that. It's really complicated.
It seems like all the compliance and legal details of each country must have its own challenges and things you have to learn and solve for.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that we sort of anticipated that, for example, EU countries would be very similar, and what we found is that they're completely dissimilar. Like there's almost nothing. Even neighboring countries are completely different in the way they operate, in the way their laws work, and what is locally expected of you. It's absurd how hard it is to set up several entities. Even just after remote IPOs, and I retire from my function after many years. If I ever start another company, I'm never going to start a company in multiple countries anymore, because it's an incredible amount of pain. And for one, I could just use remote, but it's incredible amount of pain to just do this in 2 countries, let alone in 50 to 80. Yeah.
Right. I think about sort of the abstraction layer, that if you sort of wanted, sort of wave a magic wand and you wanted to paint, like, what does this look like 10 years from now? The abstraction layer really should feel like, as a remote employer, you could just like sort of wave a magic wand and the whole world has come to agreement and understanding, mutual agreement and understanding on how all of these features and functions should work. But today we're at a state where each location geography has its own expectations and understanding of how these things work. So I wonder, do you think that is there like an active piece of that puzzle that you kind of work to shape, or do you think that those kinds of things will kind of get shaped organically on their own over time?
Now, I don't think they will do that over time organically because the incentives are not there, right? Each country has their own specific reasons for implementing particular laws, right? And it can be related to local reasons, which can be all sorts of things, or just because of history, which is often the case, right? With these kind of things. And also the decision timelines are very, very long on this. One thing we're starting to see is that and of course, yes, remote wants to be this abstraction layer, right? Like that is exactly what we want to do. And for our own sake, we want to make it easier to manage all of this locally as well and to streamline it. But generally what we see is that like developments in jurisdictions go in the opposite direction, where it becomes more complex and there's more reasons for change. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, right? Beyond just, nationalism and xenophobia, there's all sorts of reasons for that. But one thing we do see is we start to see, for example, remote visas, remote work visa. So this is not something branded by my company, but it's like something that countries implement so that if you are a remote worker and you want to start working from a country, you can actually do that, which is, this is an angle that we can address it remote, but not without difficulty, which is if you say, well, I'm a remote worker, I can now work anywhere. That's not true, because if you travel to another country, you still need to get a visa. And if you get a visa to work there, that's a whole different deal than just getting a tourist visa. So right. This is something that is surprisingly complex. And luckily, some countries have started addressing this with this remote work visa, where you can go to a country and you can work for, X months or X years, or maybe even indefinitely as a remote worker, given that you pay local taxes, etc.
Right. So that's actually interesting, because it makes me think about a whole other class of customer that you could have, which is the person who wants to work remotely. So I think today most of your kind of customer view would be companies that want to operate remotely, but there's a whole other kind of, in a sense, segment and features and needs from that. One example might be this, how do you get a remote visa, but also how do you report your taxes if you have too much sourced income in a single place that you stayed for 6 months. So is there somebody who's solving that, or do you see that as within the purview of stuff that you'd like to solve eventually, or how do you think about that set of problems?
No, yeah, we have some things, and we already provide this kind of support to the people that are employed through us. There's definitely a few challenges here. One is that it's almost impossible to scale, because every person is unique in their own circumstances. And just taking into account the things you have to think about is like, where are you a citizen? Where are you a resident? Where are you moving towards? What are the trade agreements between those countries? What is your income? Do you have standard income, or did you have an entity set up in either of those countries? Did you work as a contractor? And those things are, for one, those are not uncommon things, right? I think all the things I just apply to myself. I'm a Dutch citizen. I'm a resident in Portugal. I'm moving this year, halfway through the year, to another country. And so I get income in both countries. And those situations are not uncommon, yet in itself, it's really hard to solve for, and it highly depends on the rest of your situation. And so that's really hard to scale. And so we do solve some of that today through remote, but there's a large part of this which is just forever going to be solved by, tax consultants, because you need to address this on a one-by-one basis. So, remote can help a little bit today, but there's also a large part of just needing to work through this yourself, unfortunately.
Right. That makes sense. A lot of challenging. Yeah, go ahead, Ayush.
I was saying, if you, Hop said that he'll start a company in future and he'll just use remote if he hires people in multiple countries. I was telling him, I got a friend who does this thing. I'll hook you up for a discount.
Good. Yeah, no, we can use that.
Awesome. But thanks for coming in. Hope, I think I got delayed with some crazy situation back in India. But awesome to join in, you guys. And just continuing on the thread, I think with respect to remote, I've seen like we used to back in the day, like we started Pesto a couple of years ago, a little more than that, 3 years ago almost. And when we started, we would say, guys, we should hire people in India, and they're really amazing, and they do well, and hardworking and all that, and really awesome people, and we used to convince them to do that. And I think one of the things which we faced is exactly this. Companies would come up with things like, how does the paperwork work? Are they going to be your employee, my employee? How are we going to protect my IP? So on and so forth, right? So I think we created a service in the beginning called PPP, which was Pile of Paperwork and Payroll Service. Because we had to spend so much time just figuring out, what was the standard and how they can quickly get started, so on and so forth. And are they going to be contractors or employees, etc.? How will you move the liability, so on and so forth. But I'm sure you have seen like a move from like people being contractors to employees, and that's what remote is kind of like making happen, right? So I'd love to understand, how do you see that going? Do people still prefer getting people on board as contractors, or they get them or as an employee, or how does that work?
Yeah, this varies a lot per person and per country. I think I don't know if you can hear. I live next to a church, and the church bells are going now. It's every 30 minutes.
It's nice.
So I think there's a few angles to this, right? In more mature companies, they don't have a choice, right? In general, if you want to be compliant, you don't have a choice. You have to employ people that are treated like employees. You have to give them a local employment agreement. In individual basis, it highly depends per country. In some countries, there's significant tax advantages, or like ways you can sort of, use the status as a contractor to avoid a lot of taxes. And I think that is what you see, for example, here in Portugal, where I live. You see a lot of people doing this. They open an entity, and then everything is under that entity. Yeah. Their car, their house, their everything. And like that saves you an incredible amount of taxes. Employers are not unhappy about this either, because it probably saves them a little bit as well. That said, more and more do we see people preferring to just be employed, as long as it's arranged in a good way, and as long as they eventually net somewhat the same amount. And I think this is this can be a challenge, because it can be, as an employer and as an employee, it can sound very interesting to hear, well, you're going to get, $10,000. But the reality is you still have to pay taxes over that. You still have to, deduct everything you want. And then as an employee, you get, much less, but it's the net amount, and 100% of that is to spend for you. I don't necessarily see a shift in what people prefer. I think it's more about, what is right for your particular situation. Is that something you're able to continue? Generally, I would suggest, if you are in a position where you're actually contracting, then that's great. But if you're not actually contracting, if you have like a manager, if you're full-time, if you're part of the team, if you're treated like everybody else in the company, you should really have an employment agreement. And it's a matter of time before countries start cracking down on this, like on an individual level as well, beyond just the employer level, right? We start seeing this in some countries like Germany, for example, which are very sharp on this, where it's not just the employer that might get a fine, but it's also the individual that might get a fine, because they're acting as an entity, and they're liable here as well. So yeah, I'm not sure. I think one thing countries have to address is like the difficulty of doing this. Like the fact that remote has to exist at all is one sign, right? Like in an ideal world, we would be building something else, and we wouldn't have to build this crazy. And the amount of work we have to do for just one person to be like completely compliant and locally employed is incredible. It's incredible. Whereas in most countries, setting up an entity yourself and just start invoicing people is significantly easier, even though the overall taxes that you have to do afterwards might be more complex. So yeah, I hope that things will get easier. I think the current trend that we're seeing is that that's not the case, but who knows?
Yeah, I understand. I think the people I talk to, I hear the same. It's felt like for a long time, there is like an entire staffing industry, and then different kinds of like companies which just popped up, and it feels like it's been there forever. Yeah, I hope that happens. I don't know if we discussed this, but a lot of people here work remote or will be working remote like in some time who are listening. And I was curious too that, how do you make us look like second-class citizens? Like, I don't know about David, but I feel really bad. So how do I upgrade? Is there a
like the setup?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, no, it's a whole thing. I think I can post a link here to a blog we wrote about it.
Yeah, I know I have Yob as one of my bookmark tweets whenever I want to look through that stack. I think you were on with Andreas.
Yeah.
You have a side by side. You have this very professional. I'm gonna actually go dig it up for my
Yeah, so I posted the link here in the notes, but I did a lot of upgrades since then, so it's much nicer now than it was. So, but I think the most, if you want to look like really professional and sound really professional, there's 3 things you really have to do. One is switch your webcam to like an SLR with like a good lens with like a big aperture. So I used to have the A6000, but it broke, so now I have the A6400, and then you use it's called a cam link, I think. And just hook it up to your computer. It's quite simple. It is definitely a large investment because with a good lens and all, it's pretty expensive. But you know what you're paying for. The other thing is then if you really want to up that quality even further, is I have one of those lights, and you can see it here in the reflection. And I have a Stream Deck in front of me, so I can show you the difference. Now it's off. Now it's on. I have a lot of daylight coming in here, but at night, of course, it's gone. And this goes really bright. So, and that makes a huge difference, especially at night. Otherwise, you have this view of like the light from the screen, or just not enough light, and then the camera gets really grainy. And then last thing is to really spend time upgrading your sound. And so in a blog post, I have this $50 microphone, which is good enough. I now upgraded to a really nice one, with this one, which is an RE20, which is this famous broadcaster microphone. And so you need a mic, and then you need to have something that actually powers the mic. So again, you need 2 components. But if you get all of that, you have really good sound. It also isolates a lot of noise from the environment. It removes a lot of the echo that you hear, and that makes you just sound really professional. Everything else is just, my preferences. Like I have a headphone amplifier, and I said I have a Stream Deck in front of me where I have all these shortcuts. But I think those 3 things, camera, light, and mic, you can do them on a budget, and it will make a huge difference.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think and it isn't like as difficult as it sounds. And and I guess there's also a lens which you might be using on camera, right? Like with high. There's a kind of lens which you might be using on the camera.
Yeah. So for this one, I use it's like a Sigma 1.8 35 millimeter lens. Yeah.
Gotcha. Awesome. I just shared a tweet thread. I don't know if DK, you also shared the same. No,
I shared a different one, I think.
Oh, that's with Andrews. Oh no. Oh god, yeah, that really was a drastic difference. But yeah, I shared a thread about how you wrote a post on managing people remotely for 8 years in your experiences, and that was a great thread. I think I bookmarked it. I keep going back to it. I saw Nico share it. That's how I came across it. Would love to hear some tips on that. I think you've been, of course, managing remote teams for a long time. I've been the whole reason I started Pesto is because I thought how cool GitLab was. Right? just I read the whole sort of book which you guys have on online, your playbook, etc. So yeah, we'd love to get some pro tips, being selfish here.
Yeah, I think managing people is like a skill that is perfectly transferable between whether you're remote or in person with each other. And if you feel like it is very different, then you should really consider what it is that you're really doing when you're managing people, right? Managing people is not hovering around them. It's not, I don't know, looking at people. It's about coaching a person and getting them to a particular place. And you can do those things perfectly when you're remote. And I think that is the most important thing. And that immediately means that you don't have to read a thread by me on Twitter on like how to manage people remotely, because you can just read any like well-renowned management book and it should apply reasonably well, right? I think it's hard to overstate the amount of work that you can do in terms of managing, that you can do by just writing things. I think that it can be really, really helpful just to start with writing things between people, even if it's just like basic career stuff, or even if it's about having a conversation together, having a set agenda beforehand, and while you're talking, writing out an agenda with notes as like the very simplest thing you can do that maybe you wouldn't have done in an office before. Because what you will end up with is you have something to look back on. It will force you to like prepare for something. It will, set the context for a particular meeting. It'll just, one thing I always try to do is I will start to try to plan my day in advance, like give context to all the meetings that I have. And like if you have a one-on-one meeting and a document between two people, and the way I do it is I make sure that my reports all understand it's their meeting and it's their agenda to own. And if I feel like I have something to add or if there's something specific to address, I will add it as well, but it's their agenda to own. And it's just such a good and easy trick. And like I see so many people just not doing that, but it will help you so much, especially if you start to teach them that. And if you, between each other, you agree that your one-on-one meeting is not discuss current ongoing work, right? It is to actually talk about, how it's going career-wise, how it's going like higher level stuff, nothing that's urgent, nothing that is immediate or needs a particular context, right? Because anything that needs immediate attention, you should address in a moment. Anything work-related should be addressed in the place of work and not between the two of you. And so if you start to see that one-on-one moment between you and your report as something like this is a special time that is just reserved for the things that happen between the two of us, that helps a lot. And then if that means that you have someone that performs amazingly, you have a really well-established relationship, you know what you want from each other, you can use that time to discuss work or fun things like personal things if you're in the mood for that. But if not, it's such a great time to just focus on just that, like make a special time for, well, how can we level you up in your career or in your current function or whatever else, or address any doubts or worries that you might have, be that around the organization or anything else. Like just doing that is going to save you so much shit for everything else. It's just like just making time for that. And like if you're really diligent about that, you don't have to have many one-on-ones. You can have one a week, one every 2 weeks, and with really great reports, even less if you would want so. Although I'd argue don't have too many reports, so you can do these things weekly. And it's, honestly, that's like it's such a good trick, and it works so incredibly well. And then as a manager, you have to prioritize them. So this is a mistake I see people make very much. Your company grows, you start to get more reports, but you also start to get more responsibilities. You're like, well, everything is going well with these people. I do lower frequency or just skip them once in a while. But you have to prioritize these kind of meetings because it's a little bit of a synchronous time that you have between people. And then, I spoke about this in that tweet thread as well, but I also think like just all other meetings, you should reduce the time you spend in them. And then in particularly sharing information, if it's pure sharing, you don't want feedback or you don't want direct feedback or you need direct input, do it asynchronous, just 100% of the time. If you want to add flair to it, just record a video, record a Loom, which is what we do at Remote. We record Looms, we share them with everybody. We throw them in like a single Notion page. So you see all the updates in that page. And that's such an easy way. And even there, like on Loom videos nowadays, you can comment on specific timestamps. So you can get a response from people about specific things. you can still discuss things. You can discuss them there or in other place. But if it's just for sharing information, the overhead of scheduling a meeting and then making sure that everybody sees that and is present, and then is not worth it. And so, those like two simple tricks: have one-on-one calls with an agenda, share information asynchronously, and then and one rule, especially like leaving GitLab, I try to apply it remote very much, is like be hyper pragmatic about breaking the rules or having meetings. Like if you feel like, or if your preferred way of communicating between two or more people is to talk with each other, then do that. Like if you feel like you're more effective or you just enjoy being together in person, do that. Like I don't want to, I try to be not dogmatic about like the rules of asynchronous work or the rules of like avoiding meetings. If teams really prefer that, I think you should avoid things that cause inefficiencies, like meetings with many people. But other than that, if you prefer to have a meeting to discuss something, then that's okay.
Do you have any
behavior either?
Do you have any in particular that sort of maybe are kind of culturally or kind of the rules for how remote runs, but where you actually have a preference outside? Maybe you like to do more meetings, or you like to do more kind of real-time discussion?
Well, I generally, I think, remote companies are much more efficient. They work really, really well. I don't like to go. No, I should say that differently. I think an office is not a good place necessarily for everybody to go to. And I think having an office creates an in and out group kind of dynamic. Mm-hmm. That said, I personally love to work together with people in the same place. And it's also really incompatible with my job. It's like the CEO, because I have many calls with external people. So I'm always in calls. It's super annoying for the people around me. Doesn't make any sense, right? If we wouldn't have the office, I would need it. I couldn't have sit on the ground because I would have to have a separate office because I'm always in meetings. But that said, I love to work with people. So pre-pandemic, actually at remote, a large part of our team, nowadays it's a small part of the team relatively, but back then most of our team was in Portugal, and we would get together at least once a month and like just work, but also go out for lunch together, go out for dinner together, maybe. And I really like that. I really, really like that. And I hope, now we see, everybody getting vaccines, and I encourage, and we have budgeted remote for people to get together and work together, because if you enjoy that, that can be really, really nice. And it's my founder and I, Marcelo, my co-founder, we used to do this all the time. We built all sorts of things before remote together, and it wasn't all remotely. Actually, I remember once or twice he flew to the Netherlands where I was living at the time, and we worked together for a weekend on a project, right? We could have done it remotely, but we both enjoyed being together and doing it like that. So, that's one of those things where remote, clearly, the name says it, it's a remote organization. We're unlikely to open an official office, although we have many offices that we have to have. But we're unlikely to ever open an office where people will be permanently. That said, I love for people to get together. We'll organize things like centrally for the whole team to get together, and I will take any opportunity I get to meet in person with my colleagues, because I really enjoy that.
Right. Do you end up flying around and meeting people? Maybe not in a COVID era, but do you imagine that you would fly to locations where there might be hubs of people from the remote team that, the remote.com team that are all working together? Would you go there and visit and kind of do a little, mini summits or something?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I have two small kids, so like it's that they are going to stop me, and happily so. Like I'm, but maybe once one of them is old enough, I can take either of them to on a
bring them along.
Yeah. I don't know about bringing both kids and my wife, who has her own life. So, no, but for sure, yeah. If it wasn't for the kids, and again, very happy with the kids, but if it wasn't for the kids, I would definitely do that. Like just meet literally everybody and just travel around the world, because I do love that. And I think that's, it's an underappreciated thing, is if you build a remote organization, to meet so many people from so many different countries and like get a taste of the different cultures. We have this food channel on Slack, where people share the meals that they made, and I just want to travel to all these people and I think that's really nice. And like the same with like holiday traditions, and like it's so awesome to see the different kind of festivities that people have, and I would love to experience them. So yeah,
that's fascinating.
Do you guys do a company-wide summit offsite in one place at some point? Do you imagine? Because I think GitLab, that was part of, or is part of kind of the culture of how the company operates. Is that something that you kind of see as kind of your plan go forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think it will not happen this year because I want to be principled about it that we only do it if really, not everybody will attend, but I want at least everybody to be an opportunity to attend. So
Yeah.
that means everybody's vaccinated. So I'll wait for that patiently. But once everybody is vaccinated, then for sure. So I think it's going to be somewhere next year that we'll do it. And then I'm already looking forward to the intense debates about where it should happen.
Yeah.
My bets
Right.
are on Portugal because it's relatively central and affordable and a nice climate. So let's see.
Right. I wonder what's the mix because I guess you've participated in these as part of I think GitLab used to do those a lot, right?
Yeah. We did them every 9 months or so. Yeah, I participated.
I wonder what's the tenor of that kind of thing. Is it like mostly fun with a little bit of work? Is it mostly work with a little bit of fun? Is it a 50-50 split? How does that feel?
Yeah, we changed it a lot with GitLab over the years because of the things that we've learned in every single one that we did. So we used to call them summits. And so I think the first one was like 2 weeks in Amsterdam, and it was like a 50-50 split between work and fun. And then we did one in Mexico in like an all-inclusive resort, and it was like a long week, I think. I think what we learned at GitLab was that, especially the larger group, you want to keep it very short. So doing it very long becomes very hard for everybody to fully participate. As in, they have to be away from their families. You have to take into account that some people fly from far away, right?
Yep.
And we saw this at GitLab that, if in particular regions of the world, if you're flying to the middle of the US from India, it's going to take you more than 24 hours. That's exhausting. So you have to...
I was about to say, if I miss my co-founder and want to work with them, it's going to take some for me to spend a weekend.
Yeah, exactly. And so what you want to do is you want to have like the core of activities to be like 3-4 days at most. And then I think what we did at GitLab was we organized like half of the time was activities that were opt-in. So nothing mandated, especially as the company grows larger. Once you get to hundreds of people, it becomes very hard. There's not a lot of activities you can actually do with hundreds of people. And then most of the rest of the time was free, and then up to individual teams and departments to organize their own activities. And then there were only like 1, 2, 3 like centralized things, like centralized opening thing, where people talk about the company, blah, blah, blah. Not too long again. And like a central party at the end. And then everything in between was like sort of free. And doing anything more than that was really difficult. It was really difficult to get attendance. It was really, it became a lot. And again, if it's a lot of time, people were also tired. And you can't forget, like, one, people have their lives. Like the whole idea about remote is you're flexible, and you remove a lot of flexibility by bringing everybody in one place. And your company still has to run. So if you bring everybody to one location, your whole, APAC team is completely dead. They still have to do, they have to cover their shifts. They have to do their work. That's also not doable. And so, I think not too long. Yeah. And then there's one very specific problem, which is if your company gets to like 100 and upwards, there's less and less locations in the world where it's actually doable to get a group like that together, because you have to start planning it more than a year in advance. You have to make like $1 million commitments on hotel rooms and whatnot. That becomes very difficult as well. So we're going to do it at remote, but it's incredibly difficult to do it perfectly. And I think GitLab nowadays has several people full-time dedicated to just organizing that. And, they have no choice. Wow. That's the only way to do it.
Right. Do you think somebody will end up creating some sort of like a travel agency for these companies? It seems like there could be almost a new type of role to share some of that load, figure out what are the best banquet halls or venues for doing such a thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be a good idea. I think it becomes very close to like running traditional conferences, because one thing that we did, I remember in Mexico, and the GitLab was like 200, 300 people by then. So it was not even the current size, which is like 1,000 more, right? We flew our IT team like a week in advance so that they could get dedicated internet lines, set up dedicated Wi-Fi around the hotel and the grounds where we were staying, just so that we would have sufficient bandwidth to power our own team. So like own access points and all, like not use the hotel ones. Like they brought their whole Ubiquity stuff and like set up their own stuff there. Like that was the only way. And so that was necessary for like 300-400 people. Imagine how it's with larger organization. It becomes so difficult. So yeah, I also think, again, being very pragmatic, at one point your company gets so big that the benefit of bringing everybody together in one location has significant diminishing returns, and it's much more valuable to bring the sales team together, or like a specific country people together. And so probably we'll think about it like that at remote, especially in later stages. I'm just agonizing about the massive commitment of money we have to do, and then we have to be in this giant hotel, and then like, is everybody really liking that?
Right.
If we really want to bring everybody together once the company is like 1,000 employees, and remote today is like 150. So by the time we're going to run this, we're going to be 300, 400 employees. It's
right.
It's going to be terrible.
Yeah, it's hard to make a commitment a year out when you're growing that fast. You're committing to a hotel or banquet hall, and you might need double the number of seats by then.
Yeah, it was one of the challenges at GitLab as well. I think it's like hotel rooms and like dealing with all of that. Yeah,
it's the once every 9-month cadence. Is that the one that feels comfortable if you are doing kind of a company-wide summit?
Yeah, I think at the time it worked really well. I don't know if anymore, like GitLab scale, I think it's remote scale, maybe still. The problem is, once you get to 100 plus, you need to plan a year in advance. So you're organizing two at the same time, essentially. So I think that's reasonably realistic. Then again, I think one thing we will do with remote is just provide budget to meet up in locations with specific teams, whatever else, and just let things, be rent distributed in a sense. And then maybe the once a year or so actually bring everybody together, and make it a point about being together all, instead of, trying to optimize for anything else.
That's nice. Yeah. Let's get Vaibhav up here. I think he has a question before we close out.
Okay.
I'll try to...
Yeah, we can. We'll invite him up. He'll be going through.
Yeah, I like his question. It's similar. It's similar to what you've been talking about, right? Like asynchronous communication, maximum productivity, work. But then you sort of like, the personal aspect of it, the cultural aspect of it is what he's referring to. And I know you just talked about that, around how doing one helps, etc. But I think, learning from others constantly is asking, is a constant thing. Does that happen even after some time when you do asynchronous? I'll let him share his thoughts. Vaibhav, are you around?
He might be checking his camera mic.
His camera? Okay.
So his question around communication and culture, that it can be costly, constantly doing that. I don't. Maybe it's costly, but I think it's worth it. I think the way you should think about the company is not how we thought about companies that are in offices. I think you should treat your company like a product, right? I think you're essentially shipping two things, which is whatever you're selling externally and however you're running the company internally. And I think your company itself is a product. You should think about how it works, how we can improve it, how we can make it better. And like part of that is also thinking about like the user experience, which is like you don't want to constantly users to face something completely new and like shift everything around it. But that said, I do think it's important that you constantly work on making it better, right? Just like you do with the product, you want to constantly make it better. And I think that is how you should treat experimentation. You should like treat an A/B test on an application that you're building, which is like, you don't want to serve a shitty version to either of your users, but you do want to see what works better and what doesn't work better. And so I think that is the way to do it. And I think one way that we realized this at Remote is that we are hesitant to introduce new tools to the whole company. But when we do, we're very confident about it. But until we do, we usually experimented with it. So often between me and my co-founder, Marcel, we try a new tool and are like, well, is this any good? Can we introduce this to more people? And if we're not crazy excited about it, we tend to just not introduce it. I think the most recent tool we introduced to the whole company was Tandem, which is this audio hangout rooms. And it's been great. I think that's one that he and I tried together for a while. We're like, it's good. We tried it years ago. It wasn't very good. Now it's good. We introduced it to the whole company and it's quite a success. Does it answer your question now that you're here?
You can feel free to rephrase if I screwed up there.
Actually, this question was on the context also. Context is the people I've seen. So this is based on the data set which I've seen. Some people who are in the different age groups, they run down the company from the perspective of business. So for them, their company is the business more of, they have 100 people, 150 people. When some things are going very right, they don't want to change or touch those things. For example, communication. They want to bring complete company together and do the communication well. They can take questions and stuff like that. And if it's working fine, they see it from the percentage perspective that 70% people are fine with it, 80% are fine with it. We don't want to, change it for like next 3 to 5 years. That's the amount. But some people who are in different age groups, like 20, 30s, I have seen those leaders who have been exposed to maybe techs or maybe a very marketing company. They try to do such experiments with the culture because they are learning in the same age group from the people as well. And they also see they want to grow rapidly. They don't see it as a business, just a model where they have 150 people down the line with them. They see it more of a family together. They see we all want to grow well together. We all want to, grow collaboratively together. So maybe I'm a little biased, but this is a set of people I have seen. And I don't know why or how to change this shift. Is it only going to be age group, or there could be some other reason how we can change this and make the world a better place?
Well, I think your attitude is at least the right one here. I think at Remote we don't really see that, right? I think we see it independent of age. We see people engaging with whatever new thing we're trying, and I don't really see a strong correlation between one or the other. That said, truth be told, if you want the organization to change, it doesn't come from leadership, it's unlikely it's going to be very successful. I think large changes, especially cultural changes, has to be driven by leadership, and if not by them, it's not going to be a strong motion. So I think that's where the change is. Like, if you want to see change and you're not in leadership today, start your own company. That's a good way to go about it.
That's the truth. I also see that.
Awesome. Thanks for the question. But thanks all for taking our time. I know,
of course,
we're about to run over, but really appreciate you taking our time. It's really awesome catching up and getting to see the other side, right? I think hopefully we'll make it there too.
Thanks for having me, Ayush.
It's been fun to see you.
Yeah. Awesome. Take care, man. Bye. Cheers. Thanks everyone else for coming down here. I hope you enjoyed the chat. And thank you, David, for saving me today.
Yeah, everything worked out okay?
Yeah, it's working out okay. Hopefully things will get
better.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll see you
Okay.
on First in Chat. Yeah. Take care.
Yeah.